I grew up in a home where there was a musical atmosphere. My parents played piano duets together. I still have the piano. It's a lovely piano. I don't play it much anymore. And my father was a businessman and my mother a speech therapist, but they were very interested in music and enjoyed it very much. My older brother played saxophone and clarinet. One time we lived on a farm, a gentleman's farm, not a big farm. It was 8 or 9 acres in White Plains. One time my brother was practicing the saxophone and a neighbor called up and said, "Is the cow sick?" But he kept on practicing. He practiced it on the porch because it was so loud. My younger brother played piano, and I took piano lessons. And my piano teacher came to the house, and I remember playing like this, and he said, "Emily, your hands look like matzahs. Keep them round. Keep your fingers up." Anyway, when I was 13, my father decided I should take up the harp. And I feel as though in those days you did what your father told you to do. I don't know if every child would say, "Okay, Dad." Anyway, my father had a very good ear. If he walked into a friend's home and heard a piano being played, he would shout, "That piano is out of tune!" And he was right. I believe he had perfect pitch, which I inherited. This helps in teaching, since one can identify wrong notes very easily. I mean, even if it's a third that they're playing together and it sounds right with the chord, if it's the wrong third, they're playing the piece wrong. My father bought me a harp, a Lyon Healy number 15, and with gold trim, and I started lessons with a harpist in White Plains. She soon sent me to New York to study with Marie Miller. She may have studied with Salzedo because my elbows were held up high. I graduated from high school with no orchestral experience whatsoever. I did have a couple of opportunities to perform, once at a ladies' bridge party. At first, I thought they were clapping for me. I heard that sort of a clap sound, but it wasn't. It was the cards slapping down on the bridge table. That was disappointing. Anyway, I had another opportunity, a job playing in a musical show in White Plains, and I played with an adult violinist who was often out of tune, I'm sorry to say. When it was time to go to college, I went to the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. There were no visits ahead of time, and there was no audition. My parents didn't investigate other schools. However, it was a fine choice, and I'm so glad I went there. My teacher was Eileen Malone. I think she had studied with Marcel Tournier in France. I didn't realize she was quite young. I think since I was 16 or 17, I think she was in her low 20s. But I didn't know that. To me, she was a grown-up. Anyway, when I had started lessons, my elbows were like this. And when I went to Miss Malone, I relaxed, and it was much more comfortable. And I graduated with a Bachelor of Music and a Performer's Certificate in harp. And that meant playing a recital in my senior year and a concerto with the orchestra, the student orchestra, and it was Harl MacDonald's Scenes from Childhood, which was written by an American composer, and it had nursery rhymes in it. It was rather charming. And in my junior year, I married Philip Oppenheimer, my childhood sweetheart. He's always encouraged me in all my harp endeavors, and he's had to carry the harp so many times. Now we have a harp cart, and besides, I don't play out anymore, but Phil has been through many harp carryings. And anyway, we lived near New York, and I began to study with Mr. Grandjani, Marcel Grandjani. He and his wife, Georgette, lived on the west side of New York in a simple apartment. His wife always answered the door and greeted me graciously. They spoke English, but with a charming French accent, because he had been born in France and he emigrated to the United States. In France, he had studied with Renier. Mademoiselle Renier, I want to talk about her a little bit. She was a child prodigy. She began playing when she was very young, and she entered the conservatory in Paris at the age of 13 or 14. It'd be like somebody here at the age of 13, 14, not going to Juilliard pre-college, but going right to Juilliard as a child prodigy. And I looked up Renier and read a lot about her. She had many famous students: Harpo Marx, Mildred Dilling, Mr. Grandjani, and I think her last student, was Suzanne MacDonald. She also taught a composer that I've seen, Odette Ledantu. So all these people were taught by a very young teacher. I remember once Mr. Grandjani gave a lecture about his past, and he mentioned that he had gone to see Mademoiselle Renier when he was very young, and at first all he noticed was the piano. I don't know if he had seen a piano before or hadn't played one. He was drawn to the piano, but soon he switched to harp. Although she taught harp, she also probably taught piano. She had many, many students and was a very special person. My lessons with Mr. Grandjani were enjoyable. He was always kind and gentle in every way. His hands were beautiful, with no blemishes or bruises. I was used to hands of my husband, my father, and brothers, who all did a lot of gardening and carpentry. But Mr. Grandjani's harp's hands were very different. They were strong, with smooth, clear white skin, and of course, short nails. At that time, I was playing in several orchestras: the Norwalk Symphony, the Bridgeport Symphony, the Greenwich and the Stamford orchestras. Of course, they didn't always have harp parts at all times, but I used to take the harp, drive, and then leave it at the orchestra venue, and if I had to practice, I practiced on a different harp. Right now, here, I have 4 harps. This Lyman Healy Style 30. Then in the other room, I have the gold harp that I had since childhood. Also a Swanson lever harp, which is for my younger students or beginners, and a Salvi, I think it's an orchestral harp. I forget the name of it. I went to my lesson and I was having trouble with some parts from some Spanish music. There were first and second harp part, and I was attempting to double them, and I couldn't seem to do that. And I brought the parts to Mr. Grandjani. Mr. Grandjani told me not to try to play 2 parts, both parts. He said, let them get a second harpist. And I think he was right. When I played for him, I concentrated very hard and would forget to breathe. I told him this, and while I was playing, he said, "You could breathe now." At the Juilliard School of Music, in the harp studio, there hangs a large portrait of Marcel Grandjean on the wall. When I went there to teach in the pre-college department, I saw the painting and felt glad to see it, even though he wasn't alive anymore. Marcel Grandjean, he wrote a lot of music for the harp. He wrote some pieces that can be played on the lever harp for students, also with titles that would appeal to children. He also wrote a piece for harp and organ. It's called Aria in Classic Style, and that's a good piece to play in church. You know, when you get a church job and the organist wants to be part of the music, that's a wonderful piece to play. And it's a challenge, but it's very lovely and audiences like it. When a prospective student comes to my home to consider taking lessons, I always play one of my favorite Grandjean pieces, Autumn. After playing, I explain how one plays the harp and asks if they have questions. After that, and I show them playing Cradle à Table near the sounding board, harmonics, and other approaches. I explain the pedals. They have never seen a harp before. They've never heard a harp before. So they have a lot to take in. They usually seem enthusiastic. But I always say they should go home and talk it over with the rest of the family, husband or wife. Recently, I had a young man who was single who didn't live with his family. So I said, go home, talk it over with yourself, and let me know if you want to study the harp. Soon he did call and said he'd like to learn to play the harp. And he said, one lesson, and we start out very simply, nothing complicated. And there is one harp teacher, a well-known teacher, who would not take a student unless they had already learned to play piano and read music. But I don't have that rule. I teach the student to read music. Otherwise, they'd have to wait a long time before they took up the harp. And I want them to start now while they're enthusiastic. I started teaching about 60 years ago, and it's been an important part of my life. We have 4 children, and then when they were growing up, it was hard to find time to practice, so I used to practice at night. And when they were either in bed or going to bed, before practicing what music really needed the work, I used to play a few lullabies like Brahms' Lullaby or Rockabye Baby or any other lullaby I could think of. And I figured they'll settle down and go to sleep and not need me for a while. And after that, I'd work on orchestra parts or my repertoire, whatever I needed. I will always want to have a harp with me. When we used to go sailing in Maine, we used to charter a boat and sail, I had a tiny 3-octave folk harp. I used it to accompany us singing songs in the evening. Of course, it had no lever, so we had to play in C major all the time. And sometimes that was too low or too high for the family, but that's what we did. And recently we went to Vermont, to Okemo. While my husband skied, I had my own Swanson lever harp in our hotel room, and I could practice a lot. And the maids, when they were cleaning the rooms in the hall, they said, "What is that?" And so one time they came in, they said, "What is that we're hearing?" And I said, "It's a harp." And said, "Oh, harp." So I played them a little concert, and they enjoyed it. That was sort of in the middle of the week, and every day they wanted to hear the harp. And recently we went skiing. I shouldn't say we went skiing. The family went skiing, and I went along to have a good time. And I stopped skiing a few years ago. Maybe I said that already. And in Taski Valley, while the family was skiing, I had rented a harp, a dusty string lever harp, from a harpist in Albuquerque. And so I enjoyed practicing in our room. And if the vacation includes a harp, it's fine with me. I think that's all I have to say about harping.
Okay.
Good.